It's true though. I want to try to talk about this in a way that doesn't spike your nervous system because it's very easy right now to speak about world events in a way that just pours gasoline on the part of us that already feels overwhelmed. And I'm not interested in doing that. I want to talk about how we come to a moment like this where the headlines are using words like invasion and capture and sovereignty and retaliation, and how we meet it from a conscious, fully aware place, an embodied place, not a numbed place, not a triggered place, not a performative place, not a place that's trying to win an argument online. A real place, because as I'm recording this, major outlets are reporting the United States carried out strikes in Venezuela, that Nicolas Maduro was captured and flown out of the country. And whatever anyone thinks about Maduro, whatever anyone thinks about the US, whatever anyone thinks about the history, the fact that it's happening at all, tells you something. We're living in an era where the world can change in a single night. So the question isn't, how do I have the right opinion fast enough? The question is, how do I stay human in the presence of this? And I want to slow that down because so much of modern life is built to speed you up. You get a push notification, you get a clip, you get an outrage framed headline, you get a hot take, you get a meme, you get a comment section. And before you even realize it, your body has been recruited. Your heart rate changes, your jaw tightens, your breath gets shallow, your mind starts building a case, you start imagining worst case futures, you start arguing with imaginary people, you start trying to stabilize yourself by picking a side and gripping it harder. And that's the first thing I want to say. The modern attention economy isn't just giving you information, it's shaping your nervous system. It's training your body to live in a constant state of readiness. And when you live in readiness long enough, it starts to feel like wisdom. But it isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's just adrenaline with a storyline. So when I say an embodied place, I mean a place where you can feel what you feel without becoming what you feel. I mean a place where your awareness is bigger than your reaction, where you're not bypassing because you're not pretending it doesn't matter, but you're also not letting the headline drive the car. And if we're going to do that, we have to start with something almost annoyingly simple. We have to begin with the body because the mind will tell you it wants truth, but the nervous system often wants relief. It wants certainty, control. It wants a clean narrative that makes the chaos make sense. So if you want to meet this moment consciously, the first movement is not analysis, it's contact. You come back into contact with yourself. You notice your breathing, your belly. You notice the pressure behind your ears, the speed in your chest, the impulse to keep scrolling. And you don't shame any of it. You just notice it. Because as soon as you can notice, you've already created a little space. And in that space, you can choose. That's the whole game. Now, once you're back in your body, then you can begin to look at the moment with more clarity. And this is where things get tricky because there are layers here. There's the immediate human layer. People who are scared, hurt, people who are celebrating, people who are grieving, people who are vulnerable, displaced. There's the geopolitical layer, sovereignty, international law, precedent, retaliation, regional stability. There's a historical layer. Latin America has a long memory of interventions, coups, and outside power shaping its fate. And that history is not theoretical for people who lived there. And then there's the personal layer, which is the layer we forget, the layer that says, what does my nervous system do when the world feels unsafe? Does it tighten? Do I perform certainty, cruel? Do I go numb? Do I become addicted to updates? Do I start fantasizing about collapse? Do I start using the suffering of others as a way to feel significant? Those are uncomfortable questions, but they're honest questions. And if we're talking about presence and resonance, we have to be willing to ask them. Because here's something I really believe. A conscious moment is not a moment where you have no reaction. A conscious moment is a moment where you can hold your reaction in compassion without letting it hijack your values. So what are values in a moment like this? For me, values look like this. I want to be informed without being possessed. I want to care without turning into a reactor core. I want to name harm without turning my soul into a weapon. I want to stay open without becoming naive. I want to stay grounded without becoming indifferent. And that balance, if we're being honest, that balance is the hardest thing right now because the culture rewards the opposite. The culture rewards certainty. It rewards outrage, performance. The culture rewards the hottest take delivered with the most moral confidence. And it doesn't matter what side you're on, by the way. The style is contagious across the board. So how do we step out of that, especially when the stakes feel so real? One way is to understand that consciousness is not the same as passivity. Being embodied doesn't mean you don't have opinions. It means you don't outsource your humanity to your opinions. It means you can hold complexity. You can say, this is horrifying, and also say, I need to breathe. It means you can say, this could destabilize a region, and also say, I'm not going to let my phone turn me into an animal. And I say animal with love because we're animals, we're nervous systems, we're bodies, we're tribal creatures, we're built to respond to threat cues, we're built to orient toward danger. That's not a moral failure, that's biology. But spiritual maturity to me is the ability to be in biology without being ruled by biology. Now, I want to talk about how we got here, not in the sense that I'm going to do a full history lesson, but the sense of how the world arrives at a moment where force becomes thinkable. When institutions lose credibility, when diplomacy feels like theater, when populations are exhausted, when economies are strained, when propaganda is thick, when leaders gamble, when people feel humiliated, when blocks decide the rules no longer apply to them, you get a world that starts to resemble old worlds. And that's not me making a dramatic statement. That's just what history looks like. People talk about never again, but never again is not a spell. It's a practice that has to be maintained. And when it isn't maintained, reality reverts. So, from a conscious place, you don't just ask who is right. You ask what conditions make this kind of move possible. You ask what incentives are driving it. You ask what myths are fueling it. You ask who benefits. You ask who pays. You ask what does this normalize for next time? And if you notice, those are slower questions. They don't give you the dopamine hit of instant righteousness. They don't turn you into a superhero online. They're just adult questions. And adult questions tend to bring you back into your body. Because when you ask adult questions, you realize a lot of this is bigger than you. And that can be relieving if you let it be relieving. You can care without pretending you can control the planet. Now, I also want to acknowledge something else that is very real. For a lot of people, world events trigger personal history. If you grew up with instability, violence, coercion, or sudden changes, your body will interpret global instability as personal threat. Not because you're rational, but because your system learned when things shift suddenly, I get hurt. So you're not just reacting to Venezuela, you might be reacting to the feeling of being unsafe in life. And that's why I think it's so important to come back to the body first, because if you don't, you'll mistake your internal alarm for objective truth. You start thinking, because I feel panicked, the world is ending, or because I feel angry, my anger is the only moral response, or because I feel powerless, I need to find someone to blame so I can feel powerful again. And listen, blame is a seductive drug. It makes you feel strong for a minute. It makes you feel organized. It gives you a target, but it rarely gives you wisdom. It almost never gives you peace. So, what does an embodied approach look like practically in a moment like this? It looks like rhythm. It looks like pacing. It looks like refusing to overdose on information or reading one or two solid sources instead of inhaling 20 fragmented clips. It looks like checking your body after you read. What happened to me just now? It looks like making space for grief without turning grief into a spectacle. It looks like admitting what you don't know. It looks like praying, if prayers are language, not as a bypass, but as a way of offering your care to something bigger than your own nervous system. And if you're not a prayer person, it still looks like intention. It looks like saying, I'm going to be a person whose attention is sacred. It looks like saying, I'm going to protect my capacity to love. Because here's the quiet truth. If you let the world recruit your nervous system into constant threat, you slowly lose your ability to be in relationship. You'll lose patience, nuance. You'll lose tenderness. You'll lose your ability to listen. You'll become sharp. You'll become simplified. And that is how the culture wins. Not because you were wrong to care, but because you cared in a way that destroyed your instrument. So part of being conscious in this moment is realizing my inner life is not a luxury. It's the thing that determines how I show up in the world. If my inner life becomes violent, I'll contribute violence, even if I call it justice. That doesn't mean you don't name harm. It means you name harm from a steady place. Now, I want to say something that might feel difficult. There's a way that people use big events to avoid their own lives. And I'm not saying that as a criticism, I'm saying it because I've watched it in myself. If I'm feeling restless, if I'm feeling ungrounded, if I'm feeling behind, if I'm feeling lonely, if I'm feeling like my life is too quiet, a huge world event can become an excuse to live in intensity again. You can disappear into it. You can become a commentator. You can become a doom scroll priest. You can spend 6 hours researching, or merely you're just trying to regulate. So, an embodied moment includes honesty. Am I actually helping, or am I feeding my addiction to intensity? And you'll know. You'll know because your body will tell you. If you're helping, you'll feel steady. You might feel sad, but you'll feel steady. If you're feeding intensity, you'll feel wired. You feel brittle. You feel compulsive. So, what do we do with that? We choose resonance anyway. And when I say resonance, I mean that felt sense of alignment, that sense of you're living from your center, not from your reflex. Resonance might mean you take action in a grounded way. You donate, you support journalists you trust, you reach out to someone who's scared, you learn, you vote when it's time, you have real conversations offline, you do what's yours to do, but you don't do it from panic, because panic doesn't make you effective. Panic makes you loud. and loud is not the same as powerful. So, coming to this moment consciously might be as simple as this. You let yourself feel the grief of living in a world where this can happen, and you let that grief soften you rather than harden you. You let it make you more devoted to what matters in your own life. You let it make you more committed to truth, to discernment, to human dignity, to restraint, to wisdom. And you accept the paradox. You can be informed and still be in your body. You can care and still sleep. You can be awake without being consumed. Because if you can do that, you become part of the antidote. Now, through some grand gesture, but not through but through the way you refuse to be turned into a reactive machine. So I close this the way I'm trying to live it. I'm going to keep my heart open. I'm going to keep my attention clean. I'm going to stay informed through a few sources I trust. I'm going to notice when my body gets recruited into panic. I'm going to come back to my breath. I'm going to remember that my inner life is part of the world. I'm going to choose as much as I can to live from presence and resonance instead of adrenaline, because I don't want the world's violence to become my internal weather. And I don't think you want that either. So until later, I hope this helps. Breathe with me and love, peace, and release.